Today's story was written by Reddit user JohnGaldt. Tippet swam along the narrow tunnel, her tail snapping quickly behind her as she avoided the others in the cramped, claustrophobic space. She sucked in a breath and pushed through the gross, discoloured water of a Nictar's excretion, holding on to the breath as long as she could until she was in reasonably clean water again. She grumbled back at the busy cave-like tunnel and glared at the glass, looking out of the water onto the main corridors of Terpsichore Station, where there was no water. Aliens strayed out there on legs in the open air with plenty of space. They didn't have to suck down everyone else's filth. Every person had a few cubic meters all to themselves, while she had to press to the glass to allow a school of ticks past. That does it. She's doing it. Screw the consequences. Tippet pushed with her tail and drove herself down the tunnel, catching fresh water where she could. She flitted by cooking stalls, shops, and long lines of apartment doors. The angry doctor. People shied away from his laboratory, warning her he is the devil, he's insane. But the miracles he had performed. Tippet glanced back in the dark water and twisted off into the side tube. It was barely wide enough for her hips. She swam quickly. The water had poor circulation, and she could barely get a breath from it. She burst from the surface at the far end, her head bobbing above the surface in the floor of the angry doctor. It was a reception area, empty chairs sitting high above her in rows along the walls. A little rail sat around the hole in the floor where she had surfaced with a lid that could close. She forced out all the water in her mouth and inhaled the clean, pure oxygen. Rolling her tongue and jaw, she hummed a few times until it came out as a true, clear note. "Hello?" she called out to the space. There was a humming tune that slowly grew louder. A human stood at the counter, glancing at the empty chairs. "Hello? Down here?" He glanced down at her, eyebrows raising high when he spotted her. "Une jolie étoile," he said. It made no sense to her. "A customer," was said immediately afterward by the little box on his long white coat. "And a fish, no less." She winced at the description. She thought to correct him, but maybe it was a language barrier thing. She was not a fish. She didn't lay eggs and could breathe air. Maybe his planet had no oceans. "You do surgeries? Can you give me legs?" His eyes lit up, shining down at her as a muscle pulled the sides of his face up into an impossible arc. White, shining teeth in the slit. "Your language is nice. You wish to be where the people are?" She nodded, then winced. "Yes." Not all people nodded for yes. He came around the bench and squatted down by the water, his chin resting on the don't fall in rail, eyes darting over her face like he was about to paint her. "Warm-blooded?" he said, the back of his fingers to her cheek. He raised her chin to look at the closed gills on her neck. "Carbon-based," he mused. He took her hand, his skin dry and oily as he rubbed her fingers and looked closely at her palm. "Iron-based blood, nerves, sinew, and muscle tissue. You are nice, just good, great, nice, lovely," said his little voice box flatly. His voice, however, was anything but flat. It bubbled high and low and echoed itself, occasionally breaking off as a repeated bubbling "ha" escaped his lips. He cheered and sang many words while gesturing to his left. "Enter," was all the box said. A chute opened beside her and she took a deep breath, ducking below the surface and swimming in the direction he had pointed. Her ears popped when the door closed behind her. She swam along, turning upward until she entered a tiny space, a door sealing her in. She felt like she was in a test tube and her heart started thundering with claustrophobia. The water drained suddenly and the room fluoresced a bright purple. She writhed on the glass, struggling under her own weight. The room hummed with the bright ultraviolet light, her hand sweeping over the smooth, featureless glass around her. It suddenly dumped her out, and she sucked in a breath before hitting water. It was tasteless, no salt, no phosphates, no air. She could barely feel it on her skin. She kept her head above the distilled water. "Prepared?" said the little box. He ran his arms through blades of UV light, his fingers dancing as they let off steam. I haven't paid, or signed anything," she said. "Je ne sais pas d'argent pour de telles choses." No money. Again, the translation seemed woefully short for how long he spoke. She was in a small tank, open to the air of what looked like a clean room, plastic sheeting lining the walls, screens flicked over what she recognized from school as her own anatomy. Words she understood quickly changed to unfamiliar left-aligned text. This was fine. It was natural to be scared of a surgical room. He wouldn't be on the station if he was any kind of threat, and he seemed genuinely excited to perform the surgery. He even seemed nice when his face wasn't split across the middle to reveal omnivorous teeth. He let out another bubbling slew of ha's. His translator was silent. She looked at the screen, following his stylist. He had shaped and designed legs, peeling back muscles and anchoring them in place, attaching nerves. He was clearly an expert, and the result looked, well, she would look like an alien that had evolved on land. Able to walk high above the waves, to stride over the mountains and valleys of the surface. Tippett pushed down her nerves as he stared at her expectantly and nodded. He simply kept staring, his lips in a broad smile. She felt heavier, her tail falling slowly in the slowly draining distilled water. Her eyes struggled to remain open, trying to hold on to the world, black oozing down the walls around her until all she could see was the point of light and hear the thud of her head resting on the bench. Tippett's eyes flicked open. She startled awake, rising from the bench and lifting. She looked down at a pair of dead, lifeless legs. She closed her eyes and reached up to the thin band wrapped around her head like a crown. "It worked," said a flat voice beside her. "Relax." "I can't feel them," she said. "One moment," he said. She turned to see him wearing a band on his own head, a thick cord of signal wires plugged into it. He sat down on a metal stool, flexing his leg forward and back, wriggling his foot about. Tippett began to feel tingles down her leg, and when she reached to scratch, her leg moved, seemingly with only a thought. She gasped, wriggling the 5 little toes on her new foot, and turning back to face him, grinning broadly. He had a fresh scar on his throat. She was sure that wasn't there before. "Speak," said his translator. He handed her a little page of her language. It was a song, so she began to sing. "As the waves reach the roshi." She furrowed her brow. He nodded, tapping the page. She started to feel the metal bench below her leg, rolling her ankle and now the other. She shook off the strange sensation and continued reading the page. "And the sun sets derrière les nuages." She rolled her jaw, focusing hard on the page, but found she couldn't say the words. She scanned the line over and over. Each time it made less sense. "Allow me," he said. He said. The box chirping out words she recognized as her own, but she could not understand. He took the page. "Alors que les vagues frappent l'ocean, et le soleil se couche derrière les nuages." "Your language is positively beautiful," he said. I can understand you," she said in what she somehow knew to be English. "No brain damage? More good news. I mean, I'm a nice guy, but I just keep on losing my patience." Her eyes went wide. There were 2 distinctly different ways to interpret his words. She thought back to the strange symbols at his door that had translated to the angry doctor. She remembered their shape and now could understand their meaning. The mad scientist? "You are a splendid creature. Oh, I could paint you for hours. But where are my manners? You must heal and walk." His translator hummed out only 3 words, and he scowled at it. "This is woefully inadequate, and no longer necessary," he said, switching it off. Why can't I speak Nautic? As I explained, for art like this, I do not charge money. Splendid, belle langue, he said.